The wind moved softly through the dry grass, brushing against rusted fence posts and broken boards. Somewhere beyond the edge of a dirt path, behind a half-collapsed shed, a sound interrupted the silence. Faint, strained, and almost missed. A whimper, low and rhythmic, carried on the still air. He stopped walking. The man turned toward the sound, stepping through scattered rubbish and sun-bleached wood. As he rounded the corner, his breath slowed. There, at the base of a leaning fence post, a dog lay shackled to the ground by a short, rusted chain. Her fur, once likely golden, was now dull and streaked with earth. Clumps of dirt clung to the long strands on her haunches. Her ribs pushed hard against the skin, rising and falling with effort. She didn't bark. She didn't move. Only her eyes followed, wide, quiet, and fixed on him. He crouched down, slowly. She flinched at first, then lay still again, her head lowering to the dirt. The chain was wrapped twice around a bolt hammered into the wood, barely giving her room to stand. Yet she hadn't tried. There were shallow scrapes along her forelegs. Not fresh, not healed either. Signs of time spent pulling and giving up. A shallow bowl sat beside her, dry and overturned. She didn't growl, didn't resist when he reached for the chain. His fingers worked gently at the knot of rusted links. There was no collar, just a loop around her neck, improvised from wire and an old leather belt. As he loosened it, she shifted slightly, a tremble moving through her side. "It's okay, girl," he said, barely louder than a breath. The chain came free with a dry clink, but she didn't run. Instead, she lifted her head, then her front legs. Her back legs shook but held. She took one unsteady step forward, then another, limping heavily on the left. The man moved to catch her, but stopped. She wasn't trying to escape. Her nose dipped low, following a scent he couldn't see. Her body, fragile as it was, began pulling forward with intent. Past the fence, towards the far edge of the property. The earth here was rough and uneven, broken with patches of concrete and scattered debris. She moved slowly, carefully, pausing often to breathe. Her tail stayed low, motionless. Her eyes glanced back only once, then returned to the path ahead. The man followed in silence. They moved like this for several minutes, her leading, him watching. There was no panic in her movement, but no ease either. Each step cost her something. Yet she kept going. A wide patch of weeds gave way to a drainage trench, dry along the edges, damp toward the center. She stopped there, ears pricked. A low, urgent whine rose from her chest. The man came closer. Her body was still now, tense but focused. She nudged her nose under a piece of wood lying across the trench. The sound came again, the same whimper as before, but higher, thinner. Something was out there. But she didn't look at him for help. She only stayed close to the edge, pressing her paw softly against the concrete lip, eyes fixed on the grate beneath. The air shifted. A faint smell reached his nose, not rot, but something wet, organic, the smell of fur and soil. He crouched beside her again, heart beginning to tighten. This wasn't the end of the story. This was only the beginning. The trench was narrow and edged with jagged stone. Weeds clung to its sides, their roots reaching toward the dark crevice below. She stood at the edge, body taut, breath shallow. Her front paw pawed the soil gently as if testing something unseen. She let out a sound, not the fearful whimper from before, but a sharper, more urgent cry, short and hollow. Then, slowly, she began to move again. The man stepped back to give her room. She limped along the trench's edge, favoring her right side, the wounded leg dragging slightly behind her. The skin there was scraped raw, swollen just above the joint. But her eyes didn't reflect pain. They searched, focused, as her nose skimmed the ground in short, methodical sweeps. She moved with a kind of pull, not by fear or instinct to flee, but something else, something specific. Her gait was strained, her muscles weak, but she pressed on. Every few steps she paused to whine, her ears flicking back at the sound. There was no moment of hesitation, no glance toward the freedom behind her. She wasn't trying to escape. The man followed at a distance, unsure. She didn't look back at him. Her focus remained locked forward, nose tracking a scent that had grown faint with time and wind. Her ribs heaved with the effort of each breath. Still she pressed on, as if the urgency outweighed her failing body. She reached the edge of a rusted culvert where the trench deepened. The concrete mouth of an old drain opened into shadow, broken by years of water and weather. A grate, partially collapsed, leaned crookedly across the entrance. She nosed it, pushing gently, then harder. Her breathing quickened. She cried again, this time longer, a sound filled with ache. The man crouched beside her, peering into the culvert. It was shallow at first glance, just a dark hollow littered with old leaves, bits of wire, and wind-blown trash. But beneath the debris, something stirred. A faint sound echoed upward, a whine, thinner than hers, muffled by distance and damp. He reached forward, beginning to clear away the blockage. The dog stayed close, pressing her body beside the opening, tail low, legs trembling. Her head darted forward when the man paused, as if urging him on. A tangle of plastic and wood shifted beneath his hand, revealing the mouth of the pipe below. From within, a pair of tiny eyes blinked in the dark. Pups. The man didn't speak. He only reached further in, arms brushing wet stone, fingers testing for depth. The drain sloped downward and the space narrowed quickly. He could see movement now. Small bodies, clustered and silent except for the occasional soft cry. The dog nosed his arm gently, then turned back to the trench. She circled the entrance once before collapsing to her haunches. Her legs folded beneath her, ribs rising and falling in fast, shallow bursts. She licked at the scraped patch on her side, then let her head fall against the cool dirt. Her urgency had faded now, replaced by something quieter. Not relief. Not yet. But she had arrived. The man leaned back on his heels, eyes on the pups still hidden from reach. One had moved closer to the light, its tiny limbs barely able to shift through the tangled bedding. The others remained still, their outlines soft in the shadows. "Almost there," he murmured. The mother didn't lift her head. She only closed her eyes just for a moment, the dust lifting gently around her as the wind passed through the trench. The man leaned closer, careful not to disturb the loose stones around the drain. Inside, the air was damp, thick with the scent of mud and mold, sharpened by something more fragile. The unmistakable smell of new life left too long in the cold. The soft cries came again, uneven and strained, barely cutting through the heavy silence of the trench. The mother didn't move from her place near the culvert mouth. She stayed low to the ground, her sides shuddering with each breath. Her ears twitched at the sounds from below, and her paw lifted once, pressing gently against the broken grate. She didn't cry now. She simply waited. He reached beneath the rusted grate, fingers brushing against sharp gravel, plastic, wet earth. Something shifted deeper in. The rustle of limbs, the scrape of nails against stone. The space was tighter than it looked. Narrowed by years of sediment, it dipped quickly into a shallow bowl of concrete, invisible from the outside. He couldn't see the pups clearly, but their movement pulsed in the shadows like the slow flicker of a heartbeat. He stood and scanned the area, spotting a metal rod along the fence line. With slow, steady motions, he used it to pry the grate upward. It groaned but gave, revealing a dark pocket barely wider than a crawl space. The air that came up was cold and close. He knelt again, reaching into the opening. His arm disappeared up to the shoulder. The first pup was wedged near the front, half buried in debris. Its fur was damp and clumped, but warm beneath the dirt. As he drew it out, it gave a faint mew, legs curling weakly toward its chest. The mother raised her head, Her eyes followed every movement, but she didn't rise. The pup was small, no more than a week old. Eyes not yet open, belly distended slightly with hunger, but breathing. He wrapped it inside his jacket and reached again. The second came easier. It was tucked against a curve in the wall, pressed tightly to another body. Its cry was softer. He placed it beside the first, brushing leaves from its back. The third, curled under a fragment of wood, didn't move at first. But as his fingers touched its side, it stirred. Each one brought a response from the mother. The twitch of an ear, the shift of her nose toward the sound. She hadn't moved closer. She didn't crowd or panic, but she watched. The fourth pup took longer. It was deeper, near the bottom of the culvert's bowl. He had to clear away broken roots and pieces of plastic to reach it. It wasn't crying. When he lifted it, it hung limp in his palm. Its breath barely felt against his skin. For a moment, he stayed still, holding it against his chest. "It's all right," he whispered. He brought the pup into the light. Its fur was darker than the others, soaked through, its limbs cold. He cradled it in both hands. The others stirred faintly beside him, their small sounds folding into the hush of the wind. The mother finally stood. She took 2 steps forward, legs shaking, and lowered her head to the weakest one. She licked its ear, once, then again. The pup's body shifted slightly, its breath catching. Her tail lifted just enough to flick. The man exhaled, slow and low. He gathered the pups into a worn canvas sack lined with the inside of his coat. The mother lay beside them again, her body curved protectively around the bundle. Her eyes, no longer wide with desperation, remained open and fixed on the drain. Behind them, the culvert stayed dark and still, a hollow place where life had nearly ended, but hadn't. The culvert remained dark, a shallow wound in the land still heavy with the smell of wet stone and old roots. In the silence that followed the earlier rescue, only the wind spoke, soft and steady, passing gently over the trench walls. The man crouched again, peering into the shadowed hollow beneath the broken grate. The faint memory of movement lingered in his mind, a subtle conviction that one life had not yet surfaced. 3 pups now lay curled beneath their mother, but there had been a fourth. He was certain of it. She lay close beside them, her fur still damp from earlier, her breath even, but her ears flicked forward when he shifted, and her eyes opened. Not wide, not startled, but alert. As he leaned toward the drain once more, her head lifted fully. Her body followed. There was no hesitation in her movement. Despite her thin frame, she pushed herself upright with quiet resolve. Her legs trembled beneath her, still stiff from disuse, but she stepped forward steadily. The trench floor was damp beneath her paws. Her nose lifted briefly to the air before lowering again, almost instantly drawn toward the culvert's opening. The man stepped aside. She approached the edge slowly, not with fear, but familiarity. This place had held her children in its damp belly. It had swallowed them whole, and she had stayed tethered too far to reach. She sniffed at the edge again, ears pricked. Then, without a sound, she crouched low and entered. The pipe swallowed her frame gradually. Ribs brushing concrete, tail dragging behind her. The air grew tighter, colder. But she didn't stop. She kept low, paws pressing into the wet silt at the bottom, her snout leading her deeper. The man knelt at the mouth, watching as her shape narrowed into the shadows. The grate had been lifted earlier, but the space was still barely large enough for her body. He could no longer see her, but he could hear. Small splashes, the soft drag of fur against stone, the faintest whine, not of fear, but of effort. Then silence. He waited. A few seconds passed. Then a muffled sound, a low rumble from her chest, then something higher and sharper, a pup's cry, weak, but real. She had found him. She didn't call out, she didn't turn back. She nudged gently, trying to coax him from the mud, but he didn't move. His body was lodged beneath a wedge of broken stone. The cold had pressed in, and he was too small to fight it. She pressed her shoulder into the narrow edge, squirming forward, paws searching through the muck. She licked the side of his face, nudged his side. No response, but she did not leave him. The man reached for the flashlight he kept clipped to his pack, clicked it on, and shined it toward the back of the culvert. In the circle of light her face appeared, mud-slicked and focused, her eyes reflecting the narrow beam. Below her chin he saw the pup. Still, but not lost. She made no sound as she turned herself around, lifting the pup with a tender grip. The pipe was tighter now, the angle awkward, but she pulled him carefully, step by step, her limbs shaking with each movement. The water in the bottom of the culvert soaked her underbelly, but she never faltered. As she neared the opening, the man stepped forward. He lowered his hands slowly, palms up, offering support. She looked once, just once, and released her grip. The pup dropped softly into his hands. His body was cold, mud-caked, and limp, but breath still fluttered faintly in his chest. The man pressed him gently to his coat, wrapping the fabric close. He turned to the fire barrel nearby and crouched low, holding the pup close to the warmth without letting the heat touch him directly. She emerged behind him, panting softly, her body trembling from the cold. But she didn't shake herself off. She didn't tend to her own discomfort. She stepped around him, circling the fire to lie beside the other pups. They stirred, sensing her return, reaching out with tiny noses. He sat with the fourth one in his lap, slowly rubbing his sides, loosening the clumps of earth caught in the pup's fur. His eyes were still shut, lips slightly parted, but his chest rose. Once, then again. The mother turned her head. She looked at the pup, not in the man's hands, but as if sensing the slow return of his breath. The wind shifted. After several minutes, the pup twitched. A soft whimper broke from his throat. It was barely audible, but she heard it. Her ears flicked forward, her tail lifted slightly off the ground. She stood, walked to the man, and looked down at the small bundle in his lap. He lowered it to the earth. She took it back without hesitation, licking his ears, then his paws. The pup stirred weakly, reaching for her warmth. The others curled around him instinctively, their bodies creating a small pocket of heat in the cool trench air. The man sat back on his heels. He said nothing. There was no dramatic moment of reunion, no sudden joy, just the slow, steady rhythm of survival continuing, because she had not let go. For the next hour, he watched them rest together. She lay on her side now, her breath still slightly ragged, but her eyes calm. The four pups nestled against her stomach, one still half asleep. She licked them all once more, starting from the smallest and ending with the firstborn, who had already begun to shift again with energy. The sun began its slow descent. The trench no longer felt heavy. There was no urgency now, no fear. The sounds of distant birds reached the field's edge again. The man stood and moved to his pack, retrieving a folded wool blanket. He shook it out gently and laid it near the straw pile where they had rested before. The mother didn't move, but when he placed the last pup gently onto the center of the blanket, she followed. She curled beside them, head resting lightly across her forelegs. Her eyes began to close, then fluttered open again, watching him. He crouched beside her just once more. "You brought them all back," he said softly. She didn't answer, of course. She simply blinked once, slowly. Then, finally, she slept. Night fell gently over the field. Crickets stirred in the grass. A single owl passed overhead, quiet as breath. In the barn nearby, nothing moved. And in the trench where life had nearly ended, all was still. The fire in the barrel smoldered low. The man wrapped his jacket around himself and leaned against the inner wall of the barn. He would stay the night again, just in case. But in truth, he already knew. She didn't need him now. She had done what no one could have done for her. Found her young, fought through the dark, given warmth when there was none left. What he had done was only the space between, the thread that gave her time to finish what she had already begun. He slept lightly, rising once to check on them. The pups shifted in their sleep, tiny paws batting the air. One nursed softly without waking. The mother lifted her head just enough to look at him, then settled back down. No words, no noise, just breathe. And when the morning came again, gentle with golden light and dry wind, she stepped out of the trench without sound. The pups followed behind her, wobbling still, uncertain of their legs, but moving forward just the same. The barn stood quietly at the edge of the pasture, built long ago by weathered hands and left mostly to time. The wood had grayed with age, and the roof leaned just slightly at the corners, but inside it still held warmth, not from heat, but from quiet, from shelter. Here, sound softened into silence, and the wind passed only as a whisper. In the far corner of that barn, a family lay together on a bed of hay and old blankets. The pups were no longer small enough to fit in the crook of a single hand, but they remained tucked close to their mother, sleeping with bellies full and legs twitching from dreams. Their fur was thicker now, their breathing deeper. The mother lay stretched beside them, her eyes half closed. Not from exhaustion, not any more, but from peace. Her body had changed, no longer gaunt, no longer shaking. Her ribs were fading beneath muscle. Her coat, still patchy in places, had begun to show its former color, a warm brown that caught sunlight when it reached across the boards. For days she had watched over them in silence, rising only to clean, to feed, or to press her nose against each one in turn. She had been broken when he found her, but never weak. It had taken strength to survive the chain, to drag herself through the field, to lead him to what she could not reach. And it had taken something deeper, something wordless, to let him help her. The man came each morning, always the same way. No sudden movement, no voice louder than a whisper. He kept his distance at first, laying water and food near the threshold and stepping back. Slowly, that distance had lessened. He didn't try to touch her. He didn't call her. He simply arrived and stayed, sometimes sitting cross-legged on the barn floor, his hands empty, his eyes lowered. And still, she watched. There was a time, not many days ago, when she would have flinched at his shadow, when her ears would have pulled flat and her body curled tighter, unsure of what would come next. But now, as he entered, she simply raised her head, blinked once, and returned her gaze to her young. It was not trusted in the way people knew it. It wasn't surrender. It was quiet recognition, a shared rhythm between two living things who had met each other not in safety, but in need. The pups began to change quickly. The smallest one, once close to lifeless, now moved with a growing curiosity. He was often the last to sleep, trailing his siblings with unsteady steps, nosing at corners, tugging softly at loose threads in the blanket. Another, with darker fur, had taken to crawling onto his mother's back, resting there for minutes before slipping off again, tumbling into straw and shavings. They played without knowing they were safe. But their mother knew. Every sound, every rustle beyond the barn she registered. When the man laughed softly, just once at the pup's clumsy wrestling, she turned to him. She didn't move away. She didn't move closer. She just looked, eyes still, before returning to her rest. Outside, the seasons turned. The air grew cooler in the evenings. Leaves began to fall along the fence lines, their edges curled and gold. The pasture that had once cracked with dryness now softened under early dew. At night, the stars stretched across the field in a silent net of light. Inside the barn, time felt slower. She had begun to rise more often, walking the length of the stall, stretching her limbs, watching as the pups followed in loose formation. They no longer stayed at her side. They wandered, testing distance, pressing noses into new corners, chasing dust motes in streaks of morning light. Still, they returned. She let them go, and she let them come back. That, too, was part of it. The man knew the time was coming. There had been no plan to keep them, no cages, no tags, no talk of adoption or ownership. From the beginning, he had understood that this was only meant to be a pause, a breath between danger and freedom. He had offered shelter, food, and silence. What he received was something far more sacred: presence. One morning, he found her standing at the open door. The pups slept behind her, curled together in a heap of warmth and twitching paws. She did not look back at them. She stared out toward the field, toward the tall grass bending with the wind, toward the place where fences ended. She stood that way for a long time. Not tense, not uncertain, just still. When the man approached, she turned her head slightly. Their eyes met. He didn't speak. He only stopped walking and waited. Behind her, the smallest pup stirred, yawned, and stumbled forward. One by one, the others followed, blinking against the light. They gathered at her feet, weaving between her legs, their tails flicking without pattern. She remained motionless. Then she stepped forward. The pups followed. The man didn't move. He watched them cross the barn floor, paws padding softly over old wood. They reached the door, hesitated. She paused, looked back once toward the place where they had been born into light, and then, as the wind lifted the dry leaves beyond the threshold, she moved through it, out into the tall grass. The pups followed in bursts, darting, stopping, darting again. The grass closed behind them, swallowing their bodies until only the tips of ears and the flick of tails could be seen. She turned once. Only her head visible above the stalks, she looked back toward the man. It wasn't a long look. Just enough. Then she vanished. The man stood alone in the doorway, his hands loose at his sides. The barn behind him was quiet. Before him, the field shifted with wind, alive with motion but empty to the eye. He stayed there, not waiting, but witnessing. The moment passed not with sound, but with stillness. A dog, once chained and broken, had led him to something. Not just survival, not just rescue, but something older, a kind of wordless bond made not from ownership, but from respect. The grass whispered. The sky above stretched wide and pale. He stepped back into the barn, gathered the empty bowls, folded the blanket. He paused once, touching the ground where they had lain. Then he walked to the door and set it gently ajar, leaving it open to the wind. Some memories do not ask to be held. They simply remain, quiet, like breathing on a cold morning. And far beyond the barn, in the hush of open land, a mother and her 4 pups moved forward, leaving no trail but the warmth they once left behind.